a column that I wrote in the newspaper last week.
Yep.
It was about the Saudi event and about the spectacle. And I wrote an article that seems to be being responded to by predominantly the two promoters that were involved, being Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, quite robustly, and answering things that I never said and discussing things that I never wrote about. My article was about that the Saudis are fully entitled, as is everybody in the world, to invest in whichever sport they want to. And that it is a great thing that they're looking at the sport in the way that they are. But my main question, given the fact I own a football club that at one point had a Dubai-based business as their shirt sponsor, the idea that I don't want Saudi investment is just ridiculous. But a lot of furore was kicked up about me concentrating on the national anthem that was played for the Saudi Arabians in a British ring at a British event with only British fighters. And I wondered what your thoughts are on it, because Eddie's gotten very vociferous. He's called me a variety of names. I mean, I called him an imbecile, so he's entitled to call me one back.
Back and forth, you two.
But I called him an imbecile because I assume he can't read. Because if you read the article, he couldn't make the assumptions that he made. But I was interested to see what you thought about the subject matter, because to suggest that it's steeped in some sort of resistance to the Saudis is just outrageous, quite frankly.
I read your article. I thought it was balanced. I thought the points that you were making were exactly as you've just portrayed it there. I was obviously in attendance that night at the Wembley show for AJ versus Dubois, and the national anthem played out. So my attitude towards it is that I'm not offended by it at all. I have no real thought process.
By the way, neither was I.
To it.
Just thought it was strange.
I get that, and I get your angle on it, and your opinion on it. For me, if we go back 12 months, let's say, before Riyadh season became a thing into the world of boxing, I've had many conversations with you where I've expressed my frustrations about matches not happening and various frustrations that I've got within the sport. We're now 12 months on, and Riyadh season has been a really good thing for boxing because it's obviously brought us fights that we all want to see. Yep. It's given opportunities to fighters that we want to see get those opportunities, and it's only, it seems, getting better because we're talking about a fight that is the best fight in boxing, Beterbiev Bivol. We stacked on the card underneath it that everybody's extremely excited about it. And that's my focus, purely. I just want to see the best fight, the best guys. If there's little bits that come along the way that the people that hold the purse strings want, I'm all right with it, if I'm dead honest about it. And I think the majority of fight fans, when I speak to them, I don't think they're bothered about it either. I understood the point that you were making in the article. I completely agree that maybe some people have heard things and gone off on a different tangent and made it something that it's absolutely not, because I thought there was a lot of fair points in what you were making. Yeah, I mean, the article is predominantly about the values of our country. And I agree that if the Saudi Arabians want to pour hundreds of millions of pounds into boxing, then what they request of it is something that should be discussed. My bigger question is how far are you prepared to go and how far you allowed things to manifest themselves? And the bigger question for me was not about Saudi investment and not about Saudi principles and not about denigrating their national anthem. It was simply questioning why sometimes in our country are we quite prepared to sell everything to everyone and to retain no value. So it was more of a political angle rather than a sporting angle?
Well, it certainly wasn't about the Saudis. And it certainly, and ultimately it makes a very difficult situation for both Eddie and for Frank, because if you're going to have freedom of speech shut down, if you're going to have journalists shut down, which is what happened on that evening, then you're in a country where freedom of speech is the cornerstone of that democracy. And if Eddie and Frank were to take away the commercial proposition and to look at the integrity and their values, they're prepared to compromise their values and principles for the financial gain. And I understand that. It's a business. And I understand what the fighters are getting from it. And I also think it is relatively ridiculous, and you've made this point, and I'm going to address it quickly before we move on, to suggest that these fights couldn't have been made. Because if we've got...
Well, they weren't being.
Well, then what does that tell you about the people that are now being applauded for making these fights, or what they've had to do, which couldn't be done previously? If you've got Tyson Fury being represented by a British promoter, and you've got Anthony Joshua, which is the fight that everyone wanted for years, Fury versus Joshua, represented by a British promoter, both of them belt holders, and you can't get two British promoters with two British fighters to make fights, what does that tell you about what they're doing? And what does it tell you that it needs the Saudis to come in to be able to fix a problem that should never have been there in the first place? Promoters should have been able to make fights And all that's really happened in this marketplace is the price tags got bigger.
Yeah.
The same things are getting paid twice the amount of money to happen. And ultimately, I think it reflects badly on those that are saying, well, hang on a second, don't dare criticise the Saudis, because none of these fights would ever have been made if they hadn't have come in. And there might be some truth to that. But then they should look at themselves as well and say, why is that the case?
But are fight fans bothered about that?
No, I know they're not. And that's a fair comment.
From my point of view,
That's a fair comment.
As a fan, I'm not bothered who represents who. I don't care who puts what fight on. I want to see the fight.
Happen. Yeah.
And Riyadh season absolutely has come in and been able to satisfy the ego and the greed of whatever that was previously that was preventing those fights from happening. And we're seeing them now.
I agree. It just would be nice if people, if they have an issue with something, to address the issue that's written rather than position themselves
and
because they want to keep.
I think we've both experienced
certain
that
parts of their
over our time,
anatomy in a trough.
Yes.
Anyway, let's get back in the ring. It's more interesting.